Since my last Venus Flytraps video, I've been getting a lot of inquiries regarding my exciting new feeding method. It's a method which I literally discovered by accident. It's one that is relatively simple, very effective, and in my opinion, it's a lot more fun than other feeding methods out there. So if you're feeding your Venus Flytraps indoors or you just want to see them grow their best, this feeding method is for you. This video goes over the finer details of how I use this technique to feed my plants. I'll be going over the basic tools that I use, and I'll also be explaining why I've got these fluorescent yarn balls at the end of this fishing line. It's all about making you a more effective plant feeder and growing bigger, stronger plants just like this. My name is Jerry from Succulent Flytraps. I'm just going to start off explaining why you would even think about feeding your plants. If you're growing your Venus Flytraps indoors, then your plant isn't going to be exposed to as many insects as if it was grown outdoors. Therefore, it's important to identify whether your plant is actually catching any prey items. So how do you know if your plant is catching any insects? It takes around about a week for the traps to digest their prey items. After the traps have opened, they will reveal the carcasses of insects that have been trapped and digested, like these flies here. This plant has been grown outdoors, therefore it shows a variety of prey items that have been caught. Sometimes you may have to look a little harder for insects, such as this fly that's been flushed out of the trap by rainwater. For traps that are in the process of digesting, you will see that they're sealed around the edges of the traps. This is to contain the acid to digest the prey items that have been caught. You'll see a bit of a bulge on the sides of the trap, and you'll also see a slight groove around the outer edges. Now you know the signs to look out for to indicate that your plant is catching and digesting prey items. If you're not seeing any of those signs in your plant, regardless of whether you're growing your plant indoors or outdoors, then consider feeding your plant. It's really going to give your plant some vital trace elements such as nitrogen, which is going to make your plant look its best. What if your plant is actually catching and digesting prey items? Does that mean you shouldn't consider feeding your plant? Absolutely not. In my experience, even though my plants, which I grow outdoors, are catching insects, by me giving them extra feeding sessions, it really gives my plants a nice growth spurt, particularly when you're using nutritious food items, which I'm going to come to next in the video. So now I'm going to explain what food items I use and how I prepare them before feeding my plants. Here are the food items that I use to feed my plants. These are frozen bloodworms. I've just taken these out of the freezer. They come in these blister packs. I just get these from the local pet store, which sell these as fish food. My rationale is that if they're good enough for fish, they're going to be super for plants as well. I just like to keep these in a plastic bag, and in that bag I also like to have a container to put the bloodworms into. I just use these 35mm film canisters. You can use any container, of course, but I just like to use these. To take them out, it's just a matter of popping them out from the blister pack, like so. Place that into your container. I fit around about 3 of these cubes in the one container, and it's just a matter now of thawing them out. To thaw out the bloodworms, I just get some warm water into a bowl. Don't use boiling water, just warm water for this. Put that aside, and then I just place my frozen bloodworms into that water to thaw out. Now, if I let that container go, it's going to do that. That will end up with water going inside this container. So to get around that, what I do is place something heavy on top, like this candle. That's going to keep those bloodworms nicely submerged, which is going to help to thaw them out. And this process will take around about 10 minutes. Once they've thawed out, just a matter of taking that candle off, pouring out that warm water. It's a very simple and clean process. And here are the thawed out bloodworms. You can store these bloodworms in the fridge for up to, say, around about 5 days. Just keeps them nice and fresh until they're ready to use. Okay, so here are the thawed out bloodworms, and here are the plants I'm going to be feeding. To help me feed the plants, I've got this tool caddy here on the right. This stores all my basic tools, which helps me to feed the plants. Probably the most important tool items are these toothpicks. They help me to take out the bloodworms from the container and ultimately lower those bloodworms into the traps. Another important tool item are these sections of fishing line, and these sections I simply twirl around after I've placed the bloodworms into the traps. So I twirl that fishing line in the traps. That's going to imitate a struggling insect, which initiates digestion, just like this trap over here. Apart from helping me to see the sections of fishing line and preventing me from leaving them in the traps and forgetting about them, there is another reason why I've got these yarn balls at the end of the fishing line, and I'll get to that reason later on in the video. Another important and handy tool item are these forceps. If I come across any live prey items during my feeding session, I always make the most of the opportunity, so I just use these forceps to pick them up and put them into this empty container. Of course, live prey items are best, so I always make the opportunity, or the most of the opportunity, to use them. This tool caddy over here is just made out of foam. Of course, you can make your own out of a block of wood. Just drill some holes of varying diameter. That's going to help you store your tools, which is going to make your feeding session a lot more quicker and a lot more fun, and you'll be a lot more organised. And just getting to that point of making the most of live prey items, I picked up some live ants from the swimming pool the other day, and I used this very same container to store those live prey items for feeding later on. We're going to be starting off by feeding this trap over here. I like to size up the size of the trap first before forming a clump of bloodworms. Ideally, you want the whole amount of bloodworms, the whole clump, to be within the trap. If you have too many protruding bloodworms, what can happen is that can attract ants, and it may attract mold. Okay guys, so just using your toothpick, form that clump. This is probably the hardest part of the whole feeding session, actually forming that clump right size. like that. And now we're going to lower this into the trap. Alright, so let's lower these bubworms into that trap. See how it closed quite quickly there. Now, because it's just recently closed, you've got those gaps between the teeth, and that's what allows you to place those sections of fishing line into like that, and then you're able to twirl that around within the trap to initiate digestion. Now, ideally, I would have liked not to have any protruding bubworms in there for the reasons I explained earlier. But that's okay. What you can do is simply get your finger and toothpick and just gently lower out those protruding bloodworms. It's a relatively simple process. Put that one over there. And we get this one over here as well. Just lower those bloodworms back into the container. And once you've got them out, or most of them out, just continue twirling around that fishing line. What you can also do with that fishing line is poke any exposed bloodworms back into the trap through the gaps of the teeth, like so, and continue twirling that fishing line. As I said, guys, it's that twirling of that fishing line which mimics a struggling insect. If I didn't twirl that fishing line, then the trap would close, but it wouldn't necessarily initiate digestion. And of course, it's the one, that trap next to this, that's how we want this one to look like. This one here is digesting. This is what we want to happen with this trap as well. Now I can already see how there's a groove there on top of that trap where the teeth are. That's a sign that it's already starting the digestion process. Whoops, if it comes back out again, let's just find another gap, guys, and put that into the trap and continue twirling around. Here's the same trap. You've noticed that I've left the fishing line in there. The gaps have narrowed slightly. And I like to see this groove near the teeth, indicating that digestion has well and truly started. I just want to get to the other reason now why I've got this section of fluorescent yarn at the end of the fishing line. Can you see how it's moving slightly there? That's because I've got a bit of a breeze happening right now, and that breeze is creating enough movement in that fishing line which gets transferred into the trap. That trap then thinks that yes, there is something still there alive, and that ensures or gives you a better chance that digestion will occur. Sometimes traps don't close as quickly
You may have gaps there. So if you have a bit of a breeze, guys, just leave that fishing line in there, and that will create a better chance for digestion. By having that fluorescent yarn there at the end, it catches the breeze nicely, and that bounces around, and that's enough movement to trick the plant. Here's a plant that I fed earlier. I just left these sections of fishing line in there. I actually left this overnight. You can see how the traps have well and truly closed, and they really have started with their digestion process. Once you're satisfied that digestion has occurred, simply pull out the sections of fishing line gently. What you can also do to help with the digestion process is rub your toothpick gently over the teeth, just like this. I know this technique works because the gaps in between the teeth often get narrower after I've done this. And this really does send a strong signal to the plant that there's something alive in that trap. I could have left the fishing line in there and let the breeze do the work, but this is just another method that you can use, guys. I just want to also point out why I like this fishing line method of feeding the plants. It's a very precise way of feeding. It's a way of feeding a leaf or a trap without disturbing the surrounding traps, and I'm going to demonstrate that right now. Let's just lower these bloodworms in. Gently take out that toothpick. Now, other methods require you to rub the sides of the trap to stimulate digestion, but often the trap that you want to feed is surrounded by other traps. So ideally, you just want to feed that trap without triggering the other surrounding ones. And by placing in this fishing line in between those teeth and giving it a good twirl, you can see just how precise this method is. None of those other traps have closed. And you're just targeting that one trap that you want to feed.
So hopefully now you're a lot more confident using my fishing line technique to feed your Venus flytraps. It really is a very effective technique. It's relatively simple, it's very precise, and it's a lot more fun than other feeding methods out there. What I love about this technique is that you've got different options that you can use when feeding your plants. You can do the active approach where you're twirling the fishing line within the trap until digestion occurs. You can do the rubbing of the toothpick over the teeth of the trap, or you can do the set and forget approach where you leave just the fishing line within the trap and allow the wind or Mother Nature to do the rest. In terms of the fishing line, you don't want it too thick and you don't want it too limp. You want that line to be able to support that yarn in the air and allow that yarn to bounce around whenever there's a bit of a breeze. I like to use around about a 6 to 8 pound breaking strain fishing line. In terms of attaching the yarn to the fishing line, all you've got to do is get a little bit of super glue, attach it to the end there, and just with your fingers rub that yarn where you've placed the super glue. You don't need too much glue, just enough to secure that yarn. Make sure you're wearing gloves so the glue doesn't go over your fingers. I would really love to find out whether you guys are using this technique. Love to hear what your feedback is like and how you're progressing with your plants. I know with mine, they've been getting a real growth spurt, and when you use those nutritious bloodworms, the plants really do take off. So until next time everyone, happy growing and happy feeding.